Have you ever wondered why, even with so much progress, humanity continues to suffer? Why do we repeat the same mistakes, live the same pain, and it seems like we can never break free from this endless cycle of anguish? Dostoevsky, one of the greatest writers in history, dedicated his life to understanding this question. He dove deep into the human soul and discovered something disturbing. We create our own suffering. But he also found something even more striking: the way out of this prison. Get ready for a journey that will completely change how you see pain, suffering, and most importantly, yourself. What you're about to discover might be the key to breaking chains you didn't even know existed. Imagine waking up every day knowing that each choice you make can lead to heaven or hell. This is the human condition according to Dostoevsky. Unlike animals who follow instincts or angels who live in perfect harmony, we humans were cursed with something terrible: total freedom of choice. This freedom isn't a gift, it's a burden too heavy to carry. When you can choose between good and evil, between love and hate, between truth and lies, you also become responsible for all the consequences. And this generates a deep anguish that accompanies us from our first breath to our last. The Russian writer observed that many people unconsciously flee from this freedom. They prefer others to decide for them, following trends, traditions, or blind authorities to avoid facing the weight of their own choices. But this escape only increases suffering, because being alive inevitably means having to choose. The freedom that should liberate us ends up becoming our first prison, and this leads us directly to the next fundamental problem of the human soul. Inside each person exist at least two different people fighting for control. There's the self we want to be: kind, brave, perfect. And the self we really are: full of fears, flaws, and contradictions. This internal war never stops, and it's one of the main sources of our suffering. Dostoevsky showed this brilliantly through his characters. They want to do good, but end up doing evil. They desire to love, but destroy those they love. They seek truth, but live in lies. This internal division creates a constant guilt that corrodes the soul from within. The problem becomes even worse when we try to hide this fracture from others and from ourselves. We create social masks, pretend to be who we're not, and move further and further away from our inner truth. The energy we spend maintaining this charade is enormous, and the result is a deep fatigue that never seems to end. This internal war is like living eternally divided, a fracture that never completely heals. And when the pain of this division becomes unbearable, something even more dangerous happens. We begin to cling to our own suffering. Something strange happens when we suffer for a long time. We begin to feel proud of our pain. Yes, proud. Dostoevsky discovered that many people cling to suffering as if it were a badge of honor, proof that they are special, deep, or different from others. This pride in pain is more common than we imagine. The person who always complains about their problems, who tells their sorrows like trophies, who feels superior because they suffer more than others. They don't really want to heal. They want to keep suffering because it makes them feel unique and important. Suffering becomes a kind of addiction. The person becomes so accustomed to pain that when a real opportunity for happiness arises, they reject it. They prefer familiar sadness to unknown joy. It's easier to be a victim of circumstances than to take responsibility for one's own healing. As Dostoevsky wrote, "Man likes to count his pain, but not to count it completely." He called this the voluptuousness of suffering, a perverse pleasure we find in our own misery. The tormented consciousness becomes a mirror where the ego contemplates itself with sick vanity. But this identification with pain has even deeper roots, often going back to the earliest years of life. Much of our adult suffering is born from wounds we received when we were children. A cruel word, a rejection, a betrayal, an abandonment. These experiences are engraved in the soul like invisible scars that influence our entire life. The child who repeatedly hears "you're in the way" grows up thinking that love is something they need to earn. They become an adult who apologizes for existing, who sabotages good relationships before others discover they're not worth it. These patterns repeat automatically, like a scratched record playing the same sad song over and over. The adult doesn't understand why they always attract the same types of problems, why they always get involved with people who hurt them, why they can never be truly happy. Most tragic is that we often reproduce with our children the same wounds we received. The father who was humiliated humiliates. The mother who was rejected rejects. The cycle perpetuates through generations, creating entire lineages marked by suffering. But this individual problem becomes even more complex when we look at society as a whole. Dostoevsky didn't just see individuals suffering, but entire sick societies. Modernity, with its obsession with material and technological progress, created a world that suffocates the human spirit. We live in cities full of people, but feel lonelier than ever. Modern society promotes values that go against human nature. Competition instead of cooperation. Consumption instead of contemplation. Appearance instead of essence. Speed instead of depth. These inversions of values create a collective neurosis that contaminates everyone. The institutions that should protect and nurture us, family, school, work, government, often become sources of pressure and alienation. We're forced to wear social masks from a young age, to repress our true feelings, to follow rules that don't make sense to our hearts. The result is a society of people disconnected from themselves and from each other. Everyone pretending they're okay, everyone hiding their pain, everyone competing to see who can maintain the charade the longest. This social disconnection greatly aggravates our natural tendency toward isolation and loneliness. One of Dostoevsky's most painful discoveries was that it's possible to be surrounded by people and still feel a deep and devastating loneliness. This happens when our connections are superficial, based on convenience or appearances, instead of true love. Real love requires vulnerability, honesty, mutual acceptance of flaws. But we live in a society that encourages the opposite: invulnerability, personal marketing, perfectionism. The result is shallow relationships that don't truly nourish our soul. Without genuine human connection, our pain becomes trapped inside us. We have no one to share our deepest fears with, our existential doubts, our anguish in the face of life. Unshared pain multiplies and becomes a solitary prison. The modern world offers many contact networks, but few true bonds. We know hundreds of people on social media, but have no one to call at 3 in the morning when our soul is in despair. This lack of authentic love creates a void we try to fill in various ways, including through rational solutions that, according to Dostoevsky, are a dangerous illusion. The modern era brought an almost religious belief in the power of reason to solve all human problems. Dostoevsky saw this blind faith in logic as one of humanity's greatest illusions. Reason can build incredible machines, but it can't heal a broken heart. Soulless rationalism creates a technical, efficient, but dehumanized world. We try to solve matters of the heart with formulas of the mind. We seek therapies that promise to fix our emotional problems as if they were mechanical defects. We believe that if we logically understand our traumas, they will automatically disappear. But human suffering isn't a mathematical problem. It's a complex experience involving body, mind, heart, and spirit. Reducing this complexity to reason alone is like trying to cure thirst by drinking sand. It seems to make sense in theory, but doesn't work in practice. Dostoevsky showed characters who had perfect explanations for their actions, elaborate theories about life, but remained deeply unhappy. Reason alone doesn't liberate. It can even imprison more, creating new types of intellectual suffering. And when reason fails to save us, many turn against the very meaning of existence. Faced with so much apparently unjust suffering, many people rebel against the idea of a benevolent God. If God exists and is good, why does he allow so much pain in the world? This was one of the questions that most tormented Dostoevsky and his characters. This rebellion against the divine is understandable, but according to the Russian writer, it's also counterproductive. Denying God doesn't nullify suffering, it just makes it directionless, without possibility of meaning or redemption. Pain continues to exist, but now without any hope that it might serve something greater. The revolt against God often springs from a childish understanding of the divine, the idea that God should be like a perfect human father, protecting his children from all pain. But perhaps suffering has a more complex role in human existence than simply being something to be avoided. When we completely reject the spiritual dimension of life, we remain trapped only in the material. Suffering becomes purely absurd, without any possibility of growth or transformation. This view can lead to an even more desperate state: total nihilism. When we lose faith in God, in love, in reason, and even in ourselves, only nothingness remains. Nihilism appears as a form of anesthesia in the face of pain. If nothing has meaning, then nothing can really hurt us. It's protection through emptiness. But Dostoevsky discovered that nihilism doesn't eliminate suffering. It just transforms it into something even more terrible: total despair. Without meaning, without purpose, without connection, life becomes an unbearable burden that drags on without direction. The nihilists may seem free because they don't care about anything, but in reality, they're deeply imprisoned in their own coldness. They protect themselves from pain by cutting all connections that could hurt them. But in doing so, they also cut all possibilities of joy, love, and meaning. It's like someone who, to avoid getting burned, decides to live in eternal cold. It may seem like an intelligent solution, but it's a living death. Nihilism isn't the absence of suffering. It's suffering disguised as indifference. But there's an alternative that Dostoevsky explored deeply: transforming our relationship with pain itself. What if suffering weren't just something to be avoided, but also a door to transformation? Dostoevsky suggested that pain, when lived consciously and without total resistance, can reveal deep truths about ourselves and about life. Suffering has the power to break our illusions, tear down our masks, force us to face who we really are. In moments of greatest pain, we often discover internal resources we didn't even know existed. Adversity can awaken our compassion, our courage, our capacity to love. This doesn't mean glorifying suffering or deliberately seeking it. It means recognizing that when it inevitably arrives, we can choose how to relate to it. We can resist and fight against it, increasing our agony, or we can open ourselves to what it has to teach us. Many of the wisest and most compassionate people in history went through great suffering, not because suffering automatically makes someone better, but because they knew how to extract wisdom from their painful experiences. And this leads us to a fundamental quality for this transformation. True humility is different from passive resignation. It's not accepting everything with head bowed, but rather recognizing our limits and our human condition without revolt or excessive self-pity. It's a genuine openness to the transformation that life offers through all its experiences, including the painful ones. When we are truly humble, we don't fight against pain as if it were our enemy, nor do we merge with it as if it were our identity. We maintain a healthy distance that allows us to feel without being completely dominated, to learn without being destroyed. Humility teaches us that we're not the only ones who suffer, that our pain isn't special or unique, but part of the universal human condition. This paradoxically alleviates our suffering, because we stop feeling like special victims of fate and begin to see ourselves as part of common humanity. This humble perspective opens space for something even more powerful: compassion. When we recognize our shared fragility, we naturally develop empathy for others who also suffer. And it's through this compassion that we find the only force capable of truly breaking the cycle of suffering. Dostoevsky discovered that the only force truly capable of breaking the cycle of suffering doesn't come from logic, nor from willpower, nor from sophisticated techniques. It comes from compassionate love, a loving presence that accepts, forgives, and heals without judgment. This mercy can come from another person, a look of real understanding, genuine forgiveness, silent and loving listening. But it can also come from within ourselves. When we finally learn to treat ourselves with the same kindness we offer a dear friend in suffering. The simplest gestures often carry the greatest power to heal. A hand on the shoulder at the right moment, a word of sincere encouragement, someone who simply stays present without trying to fix our pain. These moments of authentic human connection have the power to melt years of crystallized suffering. Mercy doesn't eliminate pain instantly, but it transforms it. It creates a safe space where we can feel our pain without being destroyed by it, where we can be vulnerable without being attacked, where we can be imperfect without being rejected. And from this safety is born the possibility of deeper responsibility. Dostoevsky's final teaching, expressed through the character Zosima, is revolutionary. Each of us is guilty for everything and for all men, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of love. When we truly understand our interconnection, we realize that anyone's suffering is, somehow, ours too. This radical responsibility doesn't mean we should carry the weight of the world on our shoulders or blame ourselves for all of humanity's problems. It means recognizing that our happiness and our pain are intrinsically linked to others' happiness and pain. When someone close suffers, we can't be completely at peace. When we cause pain to someone, even unintentionally, something in us also gets hurt. When we ignore the suffering around us, our own soul hardens. This is the deep law of compassion that governs human existence. The cycle of suffering only truly breaks when we take our part in the world's pain, not with guilt, but with active love. When we stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "How can I help?" When we stop being passive victims and become agents of healing and transformation. Humanity is trapped in a cycle of suffering because it hasn't yet learned the fundamental lesson that Dostoevsky spent his life trying to teach. Our redemption doesn't come from fleeing pain, nor from identifying with it, but from going through it with love and compassion. The way out of this cycle exists and is available to all of us. It passes through the humility of accepting our human condition, through the courage to assume our responsibility, and mainly through the openness of heart that allows us to love and be truly loved. When we choose this path, we not only heal our own pain, but become instruments of healing for others. And thus, slowly, the millennial cycle of suffering can finally transform into a cycle of redemption and love. To suffer is human, but to love, even in pain, is what makes us divine.